everybody. This is Valerie Bono from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight David Farino, AVP with NFP. Today's episode is on infrastructure, how to plan for success. For more information on this episode and others, check out the Building Bite at buildwithproactive.com. Welcome to the Building Bite podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you can hear from experts on key topics to help you be successful. I'm Valerie Bono, one of the show's hosts and head of marketing and communications at Proactive, and I'm here with my co-host, Mike Diercksen, senior consultant of innovation and content solutions. And today we are taking a bite out of insurance with our topic of infrastructure. How to plan for success. We are so excited to introduce our listeners to our guest, David Farino. David is an AVP with NFP, and he's a leader of their construction brokerage group. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Mike, how are you?
Doing great, Valerie. I got a fellow New Yorker here, so we're excited to get this going. And thank you, David, for coming on the show.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to diving into this topic with you, David. But for our listeners who aren't as familiar with you or NFP, could you give us some insights on your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So like so many colleagues, kind of meandered into the insurance space, started my career in finance. First off on the mortgage banking side, worked out west in California for a firm that was originating mortgages. Knee deep in the subprime mortgage industry, which when I first got in, we were helping people and it was great. And then whether it was homesick or just needing a change of pace, came back east and by happenstance got into retail banking at my parents' personal bank that they banked at. So that was my foray into banking, and I was there for about, I would say, 4 years roughly. And then close family friend as an Italian New Yorker, non-blood uncle who knew I was a gearhead, kind of always family events and holidays talked about turning wrenches and heavy equipment. He was the territory manager at Cummins Metro Power, and a position open for him to essentially get an apprentice. So one, it was more money, but two, it was something that I was passionate about. So made the switch from banking into the engine business, which is a pretty big leap. But I was there for about 7 years. I started out as a territory manager, managing multiple business lines. Think all things Cummins for 5-borough New York City, Westchester, Putnam, Nassau, and Suffolk. Could be agricultural pump, could be a crane. Keynote, I repowered the crane in Citi Field while they were building Citi Field, which is pretty cool as a Met fan. So stuff like that, and met a lot of really cool people. Jim Shipp, who's the principal owner of Metro Power, mentor to me, pioneer in the industry, minority, kind of on topic with what we're going to discuss today, but just a tremendous human, tremendous businessman, really, and the first North Star, as I say, in kind of who you want to emulate and respect. So that was tremendous. So got to a point in Cummins where I was getting that 6-7 year itch, and I'm a planner, always trying to look 12, 36 months out. And an opportunity presented itself to make a transition into Penske organization, which top flight organization, just tremendous amount of talent, a ton of people that are incredibly intelligent, just a great organization top to bottom. Most of the responsibilities within Penske require relocating. And as a newly married new father, relocating really wasn't something that we were interested in. So knew that wasn't really a long-term plan. And I have family in the insurance industry. About 8 years ago, I was a 32-year-old trainee at Arch Insurance in their construction silo. And that was my first kind of introduction into the industry. And the rest is history, as they say.
It's the bagels, David. I know you said California was great. The sunshine's good. It's the bagels. You got to come back for those. The bagels and the pizza. Other people just don't get it. Anyway, we could talk about that offline, but fascinating. It's interesting to listen to you talk about the different progressions and then knowing where you are now in the conversation we're going to get into, because you really have touched a couple different industries and They all apply to this topic, which is interesting to me. So diving in, one of the main topics at hand, we have this infrastructure bill looming. Everyone's talking about it. We know it's going to provide a lot of opportunity. As a broker, as a trusted advisor in the room, how are you seeing this, and what opportunities are you seeing coming down the pipe?
Yeah, so we think it's tremendous for the construction sector. I mean, anytime that you're going to have an influx of money and federal money to that, and America's infrastructure has been a topic of conversation for many years, depending on where you are in the country, whether it's a mature city that is just taxed because of the age of their infrastructure, or a growing city. And there's cities within the country that have experienced tremendous growth over the past decade. Think your Nashvilles, your Austins, your Denvers. And what they're doing is there's something that's drawing people to these areas. They're developing those areas. And anytime you have development, you're going to really stress and tax your infrastructure. So this federal money is kind of coming in at kind of the opportune time, because there's a lot of places that really need it. And what one of the underlying themes that we kind of approach is, obviously with great opportunity comes great risk. And how you approach opportunity, whether it's from an owner standpoint, from a general contractor or a construction manager standpoint, or from a trade or a tiered trade, second, third tier trade, how are you going to address that opportunity and really put yourself in position to succeed? So that's something that we're kind of focusing on. The underlying theme there is definitely not all opportunity is good opportunity. Opportunity needs to be managed effectively to create positive results. So that's something that we're emphasizing with our clients, and we kind of empower our clients to pass that on to their partners. My history, for the most part, is in the GC space. So whether underwriting or broking, most of my clients, prospects, etc., are in the GC space, which is kind of interesting because you're managing both part upstream and downstream. You have a commitment to your owner where you have to manage upstream risk. You're kind of tied contractually to meet these targets, performance, etc. But then you basically have to take those requirements and work with this, population or subcontractor pool to efficiently and economically deliver a quality work product on time and on budget. So that balancing act is something where the companies that do it well, it's something that they work on consistently, because success, as they say, is fleeting. And some people get complacent, which we really work with our clients and advise the companies that we're working for that they need to make sure that they're consistently evolving and consistently commit to consistency. I'll say throughout the podcast kind of some key points that I use, and CQ, commit to consistency and curiosity. You should always be looking to analyze the past in ways to really control the controllable variables so you could succeed in the future.
Excellent point, David. Yeah, it's very interesting, the scope and the magnitude of this. So again, though, who are you primarily focusing on with this? You mentioned being tied to GCs primarily, but within this process, who are you looking at most, and kind of what are their opportunities? We
work with kind of the three major stakeholders. So we have some clients that are owners, we have some clients that are GCs or CMs, and we have some clients that are sub-trades. And within this kind of civil space, when you think civil, municipal, you're thinking your street and road, your transmission and distribution, water infrastructure, potable drinking water, you have your wastewater management, power generation, and within power generation, you have a handful of disciplines. Obviously, nuclear. You still have, although it's moving towards extinction, your coal-fired plants. And then you have some of the more new technologies. You have your wind farms, your solar fields. So the traditional sense of infrastructure. And what's great is a lot of focus, especially built directly into the infrastructure bill, is kind of providing opportunity to these what's referred to commonly your disadvantaged enterprises. And just to kind of touch on that, who are your target categories? Everybody's heard WMBE, so your women business enterprises, minority business enterprises, SBE, your small business enterprise, and one kind of group which New York is kind of leading the way on, which I take a lot of pride in for a couple of reasons, is your SDIV, which is your service disabled injured veterans. And as the son of a service-disabled injured veteran, this one touches home. So what we're kind of working through with that is these requirements are built into the contracts, and we think it's great. We see the need. NFP in particular is very committed to inclusion. It's kind of a hot word now. I would say, unfortunately, probably more trendy than embraced. But what does it actually mean to support these disadvantaged groups? And that kind of leads to a lot of variations and potential risks. So the goal is great. I mean, providing opportunities, and we'll kind of touch on different areas of this as we move through the podcast. But one of the key areas that we see where we really are driving value is managing expectations, making sure that the intention is attainable, because that, believe it or not, isn't. So making sure that the intention is going to basically be attainable and drive results, because the result is to provide opportunity to whatever target audience that we're trying to provide opportunity to, and doing that in an effective and efficient manner. So.
Yeah, results are so important. So let's take what we've just talked about into two parts. What are you seeing from the smaller team's perspective? And then what should they be doing to best position themselves when pursuing these contracts?
So the way that we approach it is really not small and large, because you have some large minority owned enterprises that might be less than experienced in a particular scope of work. So we don't delineate on size. We delineate on experience. And you could pretty much capture the risks and exposure pretty well with delineating on experience level. So basically having your less experienced and your more experienced, and then the three stakeholders. So you have your owner, your GC, and your trade. And going through that bucket, you have your less experienced owners, your more experienced owners. When it comes to managing municipal work with a contract deliverable, with an inclusion deliverable, whether it's whatever the target audience is, MBE, SBE, MBE, SDIV. All of those are dynamic in how you're going to address them. But the end goal is, providing opportunity to what is considered a disadvantaged group and making sure that we could manage work effectively. When you're working with an owner that might be less experienced with a particular deliverable, and your owner in the civil space, most often it's going to be your municipality. In some scenarios, it could be a consortium, like public-private partnership. So public-private partnership is usually a consortium of a municipality. Usually there's a financing arm and a GC that are going to basically work together to deliver. It's usually a large infrastructure project. So the GC in some scenarios is providing financing for a public-private partnership, and a lot of variables are kind of predetermined. Maybe there's an operator. In a lot of cases, think of an airport. Who's going to actually operate the airport when the work is delivered? Sometimes they're brought in on the front end to be part of the public-private partnership. So there's a lot of complexity around that type of delivery method. When you get into some of these owners, especially when you drop down into your second and your third tier cities, not to be derogatory, but I delineate tiers on population. So you have your tier one cities, your New York, your Chicago, your Miami, your LA, larger population centers. When you get into your second and third tier cities, when you think second tier, you're thinking your Pittsburghs. And Pittsburgh probably is on the cusp of second and third tier, believe it or not. But your second tier cities are your Minneapolis, your Indiana, Indianapolis, handful of cities in Florida, handful of cities in Texas, handful of cities in California. They might not be as experienced with delivering a particular type of large civil project. So how do they approach it? Do they, one of the things we try and advise on, and that'll be an underlying theme, is building bench strength. The easiest way to kind of mitigate risk is surround yourself with people who have the experience that you lack. And a lot of times these are third party, plugging the broker. Your broker should be basically a value add, and it should be objective. So many people make a decision on their broker for all the wrong reasons. Most of it unfortunately, is subjective. We hear all the time, it's my brother-in-law. He's got to be my broker because it's my brother-in-law. When it comes into the municipal space, usually it's an RFP, and it's the race to the bottom, which is extremely dangerous. So building your bench strength, whether it's your broker, your consultant, legal, who you partner with from a legal aspect, whether it's first party, who is your general counsel, or who's your in-house kind of legal team, and third party, who you're hiring, and ever more prevalent, your technology partners. Who are you partnering with to make you better positioned to deliver that work? So those are kind of the things that we work with from our owner standpoint, making sure that you can actually deliver the project or the intent of the contract. I'll kind of dive through the GC because there's some overlap there. Less experienced GCs should be leaning on their bench, aligning themselves with a broker that can add value, working with the owners collaboratively to kind of work together to meet the expectations, and being really proactive with their subcontractor base to make sure that they're being or preparing themselves to kind of meet the requirements and understanding, maybe we see the minority requirement or the WBE requirement on the radar, but what else goes along with it? Is there an employee level that needs to be met as well? And then from a trade contractor standpoint that are less experienced, be humble. Don't be concerned with admitting that you don't have experience. I mean, by the nature of the inclusion, you're already targeted or identified as less experienced. So what do they do to put themselves in the best position to win? They become a partner. You go to the GC and you say, listen, I have the ability to do this. I'm going to possibly need some work, some help or assistance. I want to be an extension of your team so that I could learn and we could deliver this project together. Collaboration is king. So that was a lot on the unexperienced side. Transitioning to the experienced side, a lot of the same issues, and people don't realize the complexities. Maybe they have experience delivering one type of infrastructure project. A really good friend of mine lives in northeast Denver, and that's one area of the country that's experiencing, tremendous population growth, and the that are running their infrastructure programs or projects, they need everything. So they're doing street and road, they're doing water treatment, they're doing waste treatment, they're doing tech infrastructure. A lot of people don't understand what goes on from an infrastructure basis to support a technology company. What Ford is doing up in Detroit is tremendous. They're converting their central station into a tech hub. That's been about a 5-year work in progress to develop that project, but also build the infrastructure so that companies like Google, like Amazon can go there and have the computing power to actually do business. So going back to Denver, maybe they built a water treatment plant, but now they need to develop a solar farm or a wind farm or some type of grid enhancement. Mm-hmm. Well, they haven't enhanced their grid in, let's say, 30 years. So how do they position themselves to win? The easiest way to kind of get advice is talking to somebody in the seat. We use this kind of analogy all the time. I could kind of advise on something, but I've never done it. If I want advice on brokering a piece of insurance or managing a placement, the best resource for me is another broker. If I'm leading municipal placement, whether you're in Department of Public Works or civil engineering, if I'm going to place or if I'm going to put out to bid a large infrastructure project, let's say enhancing our power grid, and I know that in Nashville, I'm in Denver, I know Nashville just completed a project that went incredibly well, reach out to your counterpart in that municipality and say, hey, I'm in Denver or I'm in, Northeast Denver. We're in the early kind of pre-construction of this project. I know you've done this. You just completed this project. What were some of the pitfalls? How did you manage that?
Yeah, no, Dave, I was going to say that's a great point to just be able to pull in those resources. And I know that's such a key component of, and you mentioned pitfall. So I wanted to ask then from an insurance perspective,
Sure.
Where do you see some of these pitfalls that come out of this where we might be getting pulled down a different direction and maybe we can avoid that?
Sure. So from an owner perspective, a lot of times they don't realize that their contract is at odds with their insurance requirements. So, and just to kind of provide some color around that, a lot of times it comes down to experience level, and a lot of these disadvantaged entities, what they're lacking in is experience. So they're trying to increase the opportunity through these requirements, these contractual requirements, but they're also kind of tasking these folks with meeting the insurance requirements, and insurance, for the most part, is heavily weighed on experience. Mm-hmm. So your pricing, your coverage, your accessibility to insurance programs are a lot of time determined by your experience. So in one sense, you're trying to provide opportunity to a disadvantaged enterprise or a less experienced enterprise, and you're asking them to provide these insurance limits that in a lot of cases are almost impossible for them to obtain. From a GC standpoint, you need to basically manage or work with the owner to meet those contract requirements. But then you also need to find subs who are going to be able to meet all of the check marks, right? Have the coverage in place, have the limits, have the capacity, and the pricing. Pricing is a huge issue. Insurance, for the most part, is obtainable, but at what cost? We talk about the stress that the insurance line item has on every bid frequently. It's an issue. So yeah, a minority business enterprise might be able to obtain the coverage and the limits, but it might be astronomical in price. So are they going to bid? Are they going to win that work? When the GC puts that bid into a leveling sheet, how are they going to stake? How are they going to stack up? Those are concerns. And from a trade, an MBE, SB, knowing that their current program most likely isn't going to meet these elevated requirements, and preparing for that. If I know that I'm going to start approaching this work and start targeting this work, understanding that I need I need to put in a lot of pre-work to meet those requirements. I mean, that's step one. And that's the easiest. I feel like it's the low-hanging fruit, but a lot of people aren't doing the little things that could really position themselves for success further down in the process. So those are some of the things that they could really focus on that would move the needle.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. And honestly, it's the barrier to entry unless you are able to plan accordingly. And that's part of this whole program, is getting those less experienced firms maybe with those more experienced firms, and then through that they can get that experience and gain it internally, but also get that insurance. Something I want to go back to that we talked about in a previous conversation is a well-documented labor shortage that's going on, both skilled, unskilled. And I'm wondering, how do you see this infrastructure bill impacting the private sector? We've talked a lot about municipalities,
Sure,
the different kinds of work that's going to go on. But if it's a dwindling pool or if it's a limited pool of resources from a talent perspective, is there going to be an impact on the private side of this? Yeah,
absolutely. Looking, and I hate to commoditize employment, but from a macro level, if you look at skilled and unskilled trades as a commodity, I mean, that's essentially your supply. And work, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, is the demand. And that's really simplifying it to the most barest terms. Mm-hmm. And what you have is you're going to have, at the operational level or at the enterprise level, you're going to have, let's use plumbing as an example. Everybody kind of has a lane where they do best. And there's usually a pretty good delineation between your plumbers that do private sector work versus your plumbers that do public sector work. But with this infusion in money, you're going to have people who may say, is it worth taking a peek over the fence? Mm-hmm. So that's at the enterprise level. At the employee level, you have a master plumber that has been predominantly in the private sector, yet you have all of this influx of public money that's going to create a lot of opportunity and really push the needle from a salary standpoint. People in the public sector are going to do their best to attract talent. So that will tax the labor pool. And I attend the AGC Insurance and Bond Program seminar in Bonita Springs. And that was a leading topic. I mean, if it's not the leading concern, it's the top 3 leading concern, attracting and retaining talent. And it's hitting every industry.
Yeah, we also attended AGC Bonita Springs. We're hearing it there. We're hearing retaining and attracting top talent being such a hot button industry-wide.
Sure.
So it's really interesting to hear you talk about those points, David. As a broker, what do you do to help your insureds deal with this? And then is there a plan in place or a plan to move ahead?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we really focus on is control the controllables and making sure that you're strategic in your growth plans. I always use kind of the scenario. It's tremendously better to make $5 profit from one small to medium job than it is to make $1 or potentially lose money on 3 major projects. When I worked at Arch was the first company that I worked for that was really hyper-focused on bottom line. I mean, you hear a lot of people talk about top line growth, and don't get me wrong, that is definitely valuable. But the bottom line is what matters. And that kind of transcends all industries. What we work with our clients on is making sure that they're keeping that bottom line in the forefront and developing strategies, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, 36 months, 60 months out. Are you capable of managing this work? One of the things that we talked about in a prior conversation, biting off more than you could chew is a real issue. The leading indicator, or one of the leading causes of contractor default, or subcontractor default, I should say, is overwork. It's not when the opportunity is contracting. It's when the opportunities are expanding is when the most defaults happen, because you have all these people who are overextending themselves. They're stressing their cash flow, right? And they're taking on more than they can chew. Those are the things that we try to manage and make sure that they're front of mind. And it's applicable to almost owners, not so much in the private sector, in the public sector, I should say, but GCs, whether they're in the public sector or private sector, and definitely trades, whether in the public sector or private sector.
Yeah, that's another great point, David. So, you've heard our podcast before. We love to give our listeners an action item, something that we could advise our audience to be able to start tomorrow after listening to our podcast in order to better prepare for these scenarios that you're talking about. So what do you think, in your instance, what do you think that action item would be?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we like people to be proactive and really be cerebral about how they're going to approach their business. We think that's really important. And what I mean by that is planning. It starts with what they're going to target from a work perspective, and then really backing into how do I put myself in the best position to win? How do I align myself with the partners? How do I manage my internal processes and procedures so that my teams are really working collaboratively together? And that's something that we work with our GCs, the relationship between pre-construction and project teams and the flow of information in between those two groups, vital. And really managing expectations and understanding that slow, steady progress is going to be, one, the most sustainable, but two, the least risky. We work in a very risky environment. You have these huge financial commitments. You have, just by nature of construction, risky work environments. There's a lot of risk that we're managing on a day-to-day basis, and making sure that all of the entities, whether you're an owner, GC, or a trade contractor, is approaching that as effectively and best in class as possible.
So David, we love to close our episodes with a couple of rapid fire questions. So here it goes. What do you think is the number one item that people are struggling with when it comes to federal infrastructure packages?
Sure. So insurance requirements, and more specifically, meeting contract requirements when it comes to insurance.
Another one, David, you had an incredible journey from different industries and kind of culminating to this career you've put together. So who are your mentors? Who helped inspire you? Who helped you grow into this role?
Sure. So there's a bunch, but I'll kind of keep it as narrow as I can. My parents, and both of my parents are workhorses. And one of the things that they both say, there's no getting around the work. I mean, my mother worked 3 jobs pretty much for as long as I know. She's retired now, but she's also 70, so she kind of has earned it. And my dad, just real work-centric people. And the other one is my boss, my current boss, Anthony Diercksen. I've been with him for 8 years. It's probably the longest I've ever worked for somebody directly, and can't say enough about him. We're kind of opposites in a lot of ways, and which is great because I learned so much from him. And he tolerates me because he's very pragmatic and analytical, and I'm more what if and just I would say more creative by nature. So just learning from him, incredible technical mind, very quantitative in nature, which is kind of the underwriting piece of insurance, but also just a task manager, having the ability to quickly review a situation, identify the key points, and stay hyper-focused on meeting the objectives quickly and efficiently. At Arch, our group was really lean. We like to say lean and mean, but because of his leadership, we do a lot with a little resource standpoint. So it's been great working for him, and I've learned a lot.
It seems like you've had a lot of great mentors, and I love that you speak about your parents, and they were just worker horses, and we see that in you and your passion and enthusiasm. So that's really great to hear. Is there anything, David, that we should have asked you throughout the show that we didn't?
I think that we covered a lot of really good details. Some of the things that we probably could touch on now, changes in the space, what's going to be coming down the pike 3-6 months down out into the horizon. And one of the issues, and we touched on labor shortages, but you have a handful of really factors that are stressing project delivery. And they're macro factors. You have worker shortages, which we touched on. You have inflation. You have construction material cost escalation. You have time commitments. LA got the 2028 Olympics, which is tremendous. I'm personally a big fan of the Olympics. I think it's great that it's going to be back in the US. But with all Olympics, you have a ton of infrastructure that's going to go on to support these games. And that's a time target. And yeah, we're 6 years out, but we're on the clock. So one of the things that we are doing here at NFP, which is great, is implementing ADR or alternative dispute resolution. This is move the needle type stuff. And our teams, Mark and Ross Nissen, part of our occupational health and safety group here at NFP, instrumental in implementing that. Jeff Stagg, who runs our national claim practice, instrumental in it, and Chris Smith, who runs the controlled programs, your OSIPs and your CSIPs for NFP construction, key influencers in developing the strategy. So ADR is definitely something that is going to really move the needle. And then the other thing is different type of delivery methods, project delivery methods. So I was just reading about how progressive design build is going to be implemented in a lot of the California projects to kind of expedite the projects for the Olympics. And that's interesting because progressive design build is a delivery method that a lot of the folks in California don't have experience with. And it kind of amplifies a lot of the topics that we've spoke about throughout the podcast. So you're going to have owners, municipalities that aren't really versed in progressive design build. You have GCs who maybe they have been in different aspects of the country, but probably don't have experience because it's just not adopted in that area in LA. And then you have your trades that don't really have that much work in progressive design build. And on top of that, a lot of these projects are also going to be P3. So they're also going to be public-private partnerships. Right, so a lot of dynamic, obviously a lot of opportunity, but elevated risk managing these variables and meeting the contractor requirements that we've touched on. It's going to be interesting. But our construction population in the United States is very resourceful, a lot of talented people. And They're continuously adapting and learning and working collaboratively. I'm confident that we're going to meet the expectations, right, and exceed expectations. It's an exciting time to be in the construction space, especially from an insurance standpoint. Yeah, a lot of excitement and a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, David. It's very exciting. I feel like we could just sit and talk for hours at this point. There's no shortage of exciting new opportunities that are coming out of everything. If you could boil this down, we'd love to give our audience 3 main takeaways. What do you think? We've had this wonderful conversation today. What do you think would be the 3 main takeaways that you'd want the audience to take away from this? Okay.
So I think step 1 is really taking an honest assessment of where you are as an organization, right? From the type of work that you're gonna seek out or pursue. And what your bench strength is, right? Your internal teams. Do you have the strength in your pre-construction group or your procurement group? Do you have the strength in your project teams to deliver this type of work, right, that you want to seek? And are you aligned with your partners to meet those expectations, right? Is your broker the best broker for your organization? Right? I mean, so many times you're making these decisions are made subjectively, right? It's my relative, or it's my best friend, or it's my college roommate, right? And when you get to a certain point, making a decision based on ability matters. So that's kind of the first thing is really taking an assessment and then identifying areas that we are okay, and then areas that you might be deficient, and how you're going to fill those voids. The other thing that I think is probably low-hanging fruit is having conversations with your team and saying, this is where I want to go. This is where we see opportunity. How do we start working towards that? Right? Have a proactive conversation with your broker and say, we're going to start pursuing this, private work, or we're going to start pursuing this public work. Am I ready? Right? Do I have the insurance requirements to go, from a capacity standpoint? Maybe you only have $10 million of insurance, excess insurance, but you don't know what the requirements are going to be.
Right.
What's it going to look like? I'm going to try and bid this work, but there's a $50 million requirement or a $100 million requirement. How much is that going to affect my cost? Can I even get that capacity? These are conversations that you could have proactively to say, ideally, I'd like to target this work, but what do I have to do to really do that? And then once you understand what it entails to do that, then you could kind of back into a time frame and say, okay, we're going to start putting the pieces in place to prepare ourselves to start bidding work or aligning ourselves with this type of work. If it's 6 months or 10 months, 15 months down the road, preparing yourself to win those jobs and understand what goes into winning those jobs and managing it effectively, right?
David, so another fun question that we love to ask our guest on the show, what would our listeners be surprised to learn about you?
Yeah, great question. So I'm a Gemini. Obviously, I'm passionate. So I have a lot of interest, but I think the single most surprising thing people hear about me is, how much ground I cover a week. I walk a ton, running. I am increasing my mileage running wise, and then hiking, right? Hiking is one of my passions. So usually over the winter, I'm covering about 30 to 50 miles a week. Try to be in that range. Probably right in the middle there now. Most weeks, depending on weather, I'm probably in the 40-mile range. Now that summer's coming, a little bit more daylight, I try to be in the 50 to 90-mile range weekly. So that's one thing that everybody's like, that's a lot. That's a lot of walking, hiking, and running.
I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired just thinking about it, David. Honestly, I'm happy we got a stationary bike at home, and I'm happy to stay put. But that's you certainly have a go-getter mentality, and obviously you were committed to that as well with walking and running. That's a lot of miles. So to balance out all that exercise you do, we like to wrap this up. This is the Building Bite. That's BIM Insurance Technology with the experts. We always ask our guests, what are you taking a bite out of today? We covered pizza and bagels at the very beginning, but What would you say is the number one? What are you taking a bite out of today?
Right. So training for the 100-mile wilderness, I've been really hyper-focused on nutrition, right, and really diligent with my diet. But when I'm going to indulge, Naruto ramen in Plainview, it's kind of healthy-ish. That's fantastic. And then if I'm going to just, completely indulge, American Beauty Bistro, kind of hidden gem in Massapequa. I would say dive bar-ish with exceptional food. I hear it's not really my thing, but for the craft brewing people out there, their beer list is arguably, I've heard, the best in New York. And it lives up to the hype. There's some really good beer. And then their Long Island burger, fantastic. I'd put their Long Island burger in a Pepsi challenge with any burger in the country. So those are, and I'll just throw a third one on just because I'm that guy. Angelo's up in Huntington. It's the chef from Bravo Nader, which, my opinion, best Italian I've ever had. Little hole in the wall north of the village. I'm doing big things. Those are my three: Naruto, American Beauty Bistro, and Angelo's up in Huntington.
Boy, you've got it covered. You got Italian burgers, beer. And then the healthy-ish. What more could we ask for? That sounds delicious. You're making me hungry over here. But David, thank you so much for chatting with us today. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, where can they reach out to you on?
Sure. So traditional channels, right? I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I believe I have my cell phone on there. So cell phone number is 646-531-1627. So please text, call if you'd like. I'm pretty much working. It seems like around the clock these days. And then email. It's just David.Farino, F as in Frank, ARINO, at NFP.com. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of be on here today. I'm a fan of the podcast. It was great, and I really respect a lot of your previous guests as well. So this was good. This was big for me.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.